The coat was the first thing they noticed. It was old, stained, and utterly out of place. It marked her as an outsider, a target. They just didn't realize that the stains were history, and the patches were paid for in blood. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and comment where you're watching from. You could smell the event before you saw it. The scent of industrial-strength floor wax, lukewarm beer, and the faint, savory aroma of catered meatballs hung thick in the air of the Fort Harrison Community Center. It was a cavernous room, draped in patriotic bunting that looked like it had been used since the 80s, the acoustics turning the laughter and boasts of 200 soldiers into a sharp, echoing din. This was their night. A mandatory morale builder, a chance for the active duty ranks to mingle, to feel celebrated by the brass, and to reinforce the rigid, polished hierarchy that defined their lives. The uniforms were crisp, the dress blues sharp enough to cut glass, the shoes shined to a mirror finish, reflecting the fluorescent lights above. It was a sea of pressed fabric and bright, loud confidence. And into this sea, she walked. Nancy. She didn't enter so much as appear, materializing near the doorway as if she'd slipped through a crack in the noise. She was the disruption, not because she was loud, but because she was so profoundly, unsettlingly quiet. She held a flimsy plastic cup of water, her knuckles white. She wasn't in uniform. She wasn't in a glittering cocktail dress like some of the spouses. She was wearing jeans, worn-out boots, and the coat. Ah, the coat. It was an old M65 field jacket, a design decades old, dyed a dark, indeterminate color that might have once been olive drab or black, now just a faded tapestry of use and time. The fibers were thin at the elbows. The zipper pull was missing, replaced by a simple metal ring, and there was a dark rust-colored stain on the left pocket that no amount of washing could ever remove. It was too heavy for indoors, yet she wore it zipped up to her sternum, her shoulders hunched slightly as if the garment itself was a shield against the sheer, overwhelming sound of the room. She kept her back to the wall, her gaze drifting, never settling, scanning the exits. An old habit, the kind that doesn't die just because the scenery has changed from high desert to high school gymnasium. Her presence was a dissonant note in the symphony of self-congratulation, and it didn't take long for the orchestra to notice. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. She didn't belong with them anymore. These bright young faces who saw war as a deployment, a tour, a thing with a beginning and an end. Her war. Her war had been a different animal. It was a thing that consumed, that erased, that ended careers before they began and haunted the ones who slipped through the cracks. Nancy was here for one reason, the small laminated photograph tucked into the breast pocket of her coat, pressed against her heart. It was Specialist Evans. Today was the anniversary, the day they'd gone in, the day he hadn't come out. This event, this loud, obnoxious gathering, happened to fall on the same date, and somewhere in this building, there was a quiet, dusty wall of heroes. She just wanted to stand in front of his picture for a minute, to let him know she hadn't forgotten and then fade back into the night. She didn't need the food, or the backslapping, or the validation. She just needed to pay her respects. That's when she felt the eyes. It started as a whisper, a shift in the conversational patterns nearby. She saw a cluster of young soldiers, specialists and privates first class, leaning against a pillar. They were clean-cut, brimming with the kind of physical arrogance that comes from being 22 and in peak physical condition. In the center of them, holding court, was Adam. You could spot his type from a mile away. He was the squad's star, the one who maxed his PT test, the one who shined his boots before his sergeant told him to. His uniform was immaculate, his gestures broad, his laughter just a little too loud. He was the future, and he knew it. He saw Nancy, and his laughter hitched. He leaned into his friends, a smirk playing on his lips. He said something, and they all chuckled, their eyes darting to her, then quickly away, like children poking a strange animal. The sound of their muffled laughter was sharp, pointed. It cut through the din, and Nancy felt a familiar cold sensation creep up her spine. It wasn't fear, it was exhaustion. The coat. It was all about the coat. To Adam and his circle, it was an insult. This was a military function. You showed respect. You wore your best. This, this was something a homeless person would wear. A relic. It was dirty. It was disrespectful. Adam watched her, his judgment hardening. He saw a woman who didn't understand the rules, a civilian trespassing on their sacred ground. He couldn't comprehend the idea that she might have earned her place here more than he ever had. To him, history was something you read about in manuals, not something you wore on your back. His entire military experience was defined by regulations, by the crisp lines of AR 671, the Army's guide to appearance and uniform. Nancy was a violation of that code. She was unkempt, unofficial, wrong. Nancy felt his stare like a physical weight. She pulled the coat tighter. She wasn't cold. The hall was stiflingly warm, but the coat was a comfort. It was the only thing that was. She could still smell it. Under the scent of the cafeteria, if she buried her nose in the collar, she could just catch the faint metallic tang of ozone, the smell of the high desert right before a storm, the ghost of sweat and copper. The lining, ripped near the left shoulder, was where she used to keep her map pens. The fabric over the right cuff was stiff, permanently darkened by the grease of a Humvee turret she'd spent weeks trying to fix. Every flaw, every stain, every rip was a memory, a scar. It was the only uniform she had left. It was his uniform, really. Evans had given it to her on that last night, when the temperature dropped below freezing, and she was shaking so hard she couldn't hold her rifle steady. "You need it more than me, Sarge," he'd said, his young voice already rough with dehydration. "I run hot." She wore it now to keep him warm. The whispers grew louder. Adam's group was no longer trying to hide their amusement. They saw a vagrant. They saw a joke. Adam was emboldened. The environment was perfect for it. He was surrounded by his peers, fueled by a sense of superiority and a couple of light beers. He was the protector of the faith, the hall monitor of military pride. He pushed himself off the pillar and took a half-step forward, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the music, but clearly aimed at her, seriously. "They're letting anyone in off the street now. I thought they checked IDs at the door. Standards are really slipping." His friends erupted in performative laughter. One of them added, "Maybe she's here to collect the recycling, Adam. Check her pockets for cans." Nancy flinched, the words striking her like small, sharp stones. She didn't turn. She didn't engage. That was the first rule: don't engage. You make yourself a target. You stay small. You finish the mission. Her mission was the wall. She could see it now at the far end of the gymnasium, past the buffet table and the podium. A simple black wall dotted with small framed photographs. She took a step toward it, her boots sliding silently on the polished floor. Her movement seemed to provoke him. The lack of a reaction was, to Adam, a sign of weakness, or worse, guilt. He saw her silence as an admission that she didn't belong. He looked at his friends, gave them a "watch this" grin, and began to follow her. He wasn't malicious, not in his own mind. He was righteous. He was defending the honor of the uniform, the honor of the event. He moved through the crowd, which parted for his crisp uniform, his bright, confident energy. Nancy was a gray rock in a rushing stream, and he was the water, pushing, eroding. She could feel him approaching from behind. The sound of his polished boots on the floor was precise, rhythmic, a sound she used to associate with safety and order, but which now sounded like a threat. She just needed to get to the wall. She was almost there. He cut her off, stepping directly into her path, forcing her to stop abruptly. She almost spilled her water. "Whoa there, ma'am," Adam said, his voice dripping with condescension. He put a hand up, palm out, like a traffic cop. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, a sharp synthetic scent that battled with the aroma of the meatballs. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, but this event is for service members and their families. I think you might have the wrong building." Nancy looked at him. Her eyes, he would later recall, were the oldest things he had ever seen. They were gray, exhausted, and held a stillness that unnerved him. She said nothing. She just tried to step around him. He blocked her again. "I'm serious, ma'am. You're disrespecting the soldiers here by looking like that." And then, he made his mistake. He reached out, and with a look of pure disgust, he flicked the lapel of her coat. "This thing," he sneered. "It's filthy. You should really show some respect. That simple touch did what the words could not. It broke through her control. It was a violation. Her hand shot up and grabbed his wrist. Not hard, but with a speed and a precision that was electric. Her fingers locked onto the pressure points and Adam's confident smile vanished, replaced by a sharp intake of breath. Her grip was iron. "Don't," she whispered. The voice was a dry rasp like sandpaper. It held no anger, only a flat, cold command. The suddenness of the movement, the shocking strength in this thin, tired woman, stunned Adam into silence. His friends, watching from a few feet away, stopped laughing. The little bubble of confrontation had suddenly become tense, real. But Adam's pride, stung and embarrassed, overrode his surprise. He ripped his wrist free from her grasp. "What the hell? You can't touch me. I'm a soldier," he sputtered, his voice rising, drawing more eyes. "You're the one who needs to leave, now, or I'll have the MPs escort you out." He jabbed a finger at her chest, at the coat. "Take off that ridiculous thing and get out." "Is there a problem here, Specialist?" The voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a diamond. It was a voice accustomed to absolute, unquestioning obedience. The music seemed to dip. The conversations nearby evaporated. Adam froze, his finger still pointed at Nancy's chest. He snapped to attention, his spine rigid, his face paling. "General Dominic, sir," Adam barked, his voice cracking slightly. General Dominic was a living legend on the base, a man who had seen real combat, a leader from the old school. He was tall, imposing even in his dress uniform, his chest a solid block of ribbons that told the story of a life spent in service. He had been walking the perimeter of the room, shaking hands, but the sharp, localized tension had drawn his eye. He walked over, his expression unreadable. He looked at Adam, then at the small crowd of mocking soldiers, and finally, his gaze settled on Nancy. She had shrunk back into herself, her hand that had grabbed Adam's wrist now clutching her own lapel, as if to hold the coat and herself together. "Specialist Adam, I asked you a question," the general said, his voice quiet, dangerous. "I was just—" "Sir, this civilian, she was being disrespectful. She's not supposed to be in here, and her appearance is a disgrace to the event, sir." Adam was trying to sound professional, but the tremor of fear was unmistakable. He was trying to justify his actions, to paint himself as the hero. The general's eyes narrowed. He looked at Nancy, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint scar that traced her jawline, the way she stood, not like a civilian, but like a soldier at parade rest, a posture so ingrained it was subconscious. He saw her, but he didn't recognize her. Not yet. His gaze dropped, drawn by the proprietary way she clutched the coat. He saw the fabric, the age, the stains. He saw what Adam saw, a worn-out coat. But then, he saw something else. Something Adam, in his youthful ignorance, had completely missed. Tucked just under the fold of the collar, partially obscured by the lapel she was clutching, was a patch. It wasn't a bright, colorful unit patch like the ones on Adam's uniform. This was a subdued patch, rendered in blacks and grays, its edges frayed, the threads broken. It was almost invisible against the dark, faded fabric. It was a simple shape, a downward-pointing dagger overlaid with a single, stylized lightning bolt. Most of the room wouldn't have known what it meant. It was just another piece of faded flair. To General Dominic, it was a ghost. His breath hitched. The sound was tiny, a small, sharp gasp in the sudden silence. He knew that patch. He knew what it cost. It was the insignia of Task Force 11. The Reapers. A unit that didn't officially exist. A unit that had been sent into places that weren't on any map, to do jobs that were never spoken of. A unit that, 12 years ago, on this very day, had been declared lost, wiped out to the last member in an ambush in the Korengal Valley. Dominic had been the young major at the command and control center, the one who had listened helpless as their comms went to static, one by one. His entire demeanor shattered. The general was gone. In his place was just a man, staring at a miracle. His hand, which had been resting on his belt, came up, trembling slightly. He didn't reach for Nancy. He reached for the patch. His fingers, calloused and sure, gently brushed the frayed thread. "Task Force 11, he breathed, the words stolen from his lungs. His eyes lifted to meet hers, and in them, she saw not a general, but a witness. He knew, he remembered. Adam and his friends just stared, confused. "Sir?" Adam whispered, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a sickening dread. The general ignored him. His eyes were locked on Nancy's, and in that gaze, 12 years of silence, of honor, and of unutterable loss were exchanged. Dominic's posture, which had been authoritative, shifted. He drew himself up, not in anger, but in a profound, soul-deep gesture of respect. His heels clicked together on the linoleum floor. The sound was as sharp and final as a gunshot. And then, in the dead silence of the room, General Dominic raised his hand to his brow in the slowest, most respectful salute he had ever rendered in his 30-year career. The room had gone completely, utterly silent. The music had stopped. The bartenders had frozen, bottles in hand. Every soldier, every spouse, every officer in that hall was staring at the scene. They didn't understand the patch. They didn't need to. They understood the salute. A 3-star general does not salute a civilian in a dirty coat. A 3-star general does not look at anyone with the raw, reverent awe that was now plain on Dominic's face. Adam's world had ceased to turn. His face was a mask of pale, clammy horror. He was a man who had just realized he'd been mocking a saint in his own church. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Nancy, her eyes holding the general's, felt a single hot tear trace a clean path through the dust on her cheek. It was the first she had shed in years. Slowly, almost painfully, she brought her own hand up, not in a salute, but to lightly touch her fingertips to her brow, a broken echo of the gesture, an acknowledgement. "They're all gone, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. It's just me." Dominic held the salute for a second longer, his jaw tight. Then he lowered his hand and gently, with a respect he would normally reserve for a visiting head of state, he placed it on her shoulder over the coat. "Nancy," he said, the name a revelation. "Nancy Vedanara. We thought you were lost with them. Your name is on the wall." He turned his head, his gaze falling on Specialist Adam. He didn't yell, he didn't reprimand, he didn't have to. He just looked at him. It was a look of such profound disappointment, such cold, quiet fury that Adam felt like he was evaporating. "Get out of my sight, Specialist," Dominic said, his voice lethally low. Adam didn't hesitate. He didn't even breathe. He just turned and, in a clumsy, stumbling motion, fled the room. The general then turned back to Nancy, his expression softening. He gestured toward the wall of heroes at the back of the room. "Please," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "let me walk you." He didn't guide her. He escorted her. As they moved, the entire room, a sea of dress uniforms, parted for them. And as she passed, the soldiers, one by one, raised their hands in a silent, rippling salute, not to the general, but to the woman in the worn, stained coat, a uniform that had finally been recognized.